by-election special from Glasgow. We expect the result from Paisley South in just a very few minutes' time, owing to what appears to have been a very low turnout in this, the first electoral test in Scotland since the general election and since the Scottish Parliament became a certainty. We have a nationwide opinion poll in tomorrow's Daily Telegraph showing Labour increased in popularity over the past month, but will this be reflected tonight in a by-election brought about by tragic circumstances? The Labour MP Gordon McMaster committed suicide in July amidst allegations that he'd suffered repeated taunts about his sexuality from a neighbouring Labour MP who's since been suspended. Paisley itself hasn't exactly been covered in glory. There are both internal Labour investigations and a criminal inquiry following allegations of corruption and fraud involving public money. And there are tales of open warfare between the Labour MPs in neighbouring constituencies. Well, ingredients like these have given this by-election a flavour all of its own. Now we can go straight over now to Paisley Town Hall. We can see there are people sitting quietly at the tables. All the votes have been counted. People are sitting waiting for the declaration. We understand that all the candidates have indeed gathered in the hall. Some of them just came a few moments ago when they heard that because of this low turnout, it looks like there will be an early result. We can see Irene Adams on the left-hand side. We can see the General Secretary of the Labour Party, Jack McConnell, standing at the back as they wait for the declaration. We can see John McFall has masterminded much of this election campaign for Labour there too. There we see everybody standing around expectantly. We believe now in the general election the turnout was 69% and Labour had a majority of 13,000. We believe the turnout this time round to be well short of 45%. So that'll be interesting to see if that indeed does dent Labour's majority. Now we can go straight to John Pienaar, who's at the declaration for the very latest. John.
Yes, well, as you said, and as you can see behind me, Kirsty, the counting's over. We're within a very few minutes of a result. We'll be getting it just now. I think we can expect a Labour victory, but a much reduced one. Here's the result.
Here is the result of the Paisley South by-election. Douglas Garvin Alexander, the Scottish Labour Party, 10,346 votes. Ian Blackford, Scottish National Party, 7,615 votes. Kenneth Robert Blair, Natural Law Party, 57 votes. Francis Curran, Scottish Socialist Alliance, Fighting Corruption, 306 votes. John Anthony Dagan, Pro-Life Alliance, 578 votes. Christopher Herriot, Socialist Labour Party, 153 votes. Sheila Galloway-Laidlaw, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party candidate, 1,643 votes. Eileen McCartan, Scottish Liberal Democrat, 2,582 votes. Charles William McLaughlin, Scottish Independent Labour, Justified and Ancient, 155 votes. The number of rejected ballot papers was 19 and the total vote 23,454. I declare Douglas Garvin Alexander to be elected.
And there we can see it there, a much reduced majority, in fact the smallest Labour majority in Paisley since 1961. Labour had 10,346, SNP took them close with just over 7,500. And let's hear from the new MP.
Firstly, I would like to thank the returning officer and all his staff who have worked so hard throughout the day today. I would also like to thank the police for all of their efforts around the constituency today. And my thanks are due also to my election agent, Leslie Quinn, for running a campaign that so successfully took Labour's message directly to the people who matter, the voters of Paisley South. I also wish to thank the Labour Party members from Paisley South and beyond for all their time, effort and support. Their work has given me the opportunity to continue the tradition of service of Gordon McMaster in this constituency. The hard work has only just begun for this Labour government, determined to deliver a new future for constituencies like Paisley South. A government determined to deliver on education, on health, and most of all, on jobs. The message of tonight is that a Labour government delivering on its promises to the people of Scotland leaves the Nationalists with nothing to say and nowhere to go. The people of Paisley South today kept faith with Labour. We will keep faith with them. I look forward to representing all of the people of this constituency for years to come. Thank you very much.
There we are now, and we can look at that result in some detail in Paisley South. There's the share of the vote. Labour with 44% share, SNP 32%, 11 for the Liberal Democrats and 7 for the Conservatives. And now, of course, we can see the change from the general election, where, of course, the turnout was much higher, and that's Labour down 14%, SNP up 9%, Liberal Democrats also up 2%, and the Conservatives down 2%. Well, with me in the studio are the 4 Scottish party leaders, all of whom have been pounding the streets of Paisley, keeping a close check on their candidates, or at least keeping their candidates in close check, and I'll be speaking to them in a moment. And also with me is Brian Taylor, the BBC's Scotland political editor, and Robin Oakley, the BBC's political editor. They'll be telling us what this result means in a minute or two. But first of all, Donald Dewar, surely the real message that Douglas Alexander brought home today was that the politics of Paisley have been an embarrassment and people would rather stay at home than come out. Look at that slash majority. It was 13,000 in the general election.
And it's almost exactly the same percentage of the poll as Gordon McMaster won in the 1990 by-election. And then at the general election following, he put it up to 15,000. I mean, it's not, of course, a very inspiring contest with such a low turnout. A very able candidate working very hard for us. And as I say, a very similar pattern to the last round of by-elections in Paisley. It's also worth remarking, as you of course well know, Kirsty, that this is the first, in fact, first by-election, which has been held by the government since 1989. And I think that's just worth recording. I mean, governments have been incapable of holding by-elections. It's the first time it's been done. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it is a performance that is going to enthuse probably the pundits and the headline writers. But I think you've got to see it in the kind of perspective of what has happened in the past.
You may see it in the perspective, but we're in New Labour now, we're in a new era, and you've got a new young candidate who is meant to be everything that old Paisley didn't represent. But perhaps old Paisley are so fed up, they decided they wouldn't actually come out. It very much looks like that.
Well, all I can say to you, if you look at the last 3 by-elections ago, was Barnsley. Turnout was 35%. Shortly afterwards, we went on to the biggest election victory in modern political history. So I think, you know, naturally, you've got to make a programme out of this by-election. This is what the programme is about.
But there is a story in this by-election.
You've got to look. No, I think if you say, if you look back at the performance in previous by-elections, it's in this area and in these circumstances, it's very similar.
Now, Alex Salmond, you increase your share of the vote markedly here, but nobody made this a big fighting campaign on sleeves, even you yourselves, who perhaps, if you look back at Monklands, made much more of it. This would have seemed to have been a gift for you, and you didn't go for the throat.
Well, we fought on a broad canvas of issues. That's quite right. We wanted to fight on national issues as well as local issues. I think it'd be very foolish not to realise that people in Paisley knew about the local issue. They didn't need a by-election to tell them about it. They'd known about it for years. So we wanted to fight on a broad canvas of issues. But the story is a sensational result for the Scottish National Party, a 12% swing, Labour majority half what it was in the 1990 by-election, which Donald mentioned. And I'm not surprised he's going back into his stock. Well, it was 5,000 to 1990, Donald.
Exactly. Could I say the swing was exactly the same as in 1990, 1%,
yes,
and our share of the vote was in 2%.
Donald, sorry, the SNP in 1990 was swinging up from a base of something like 12 or 13%. This time we were coming from a base of 23%. This is Labour now a minority party in Paisley. The Scottish National Party reducing this 13,000 majority to 2,700, a sensational night for the SNP, and a bit of a slap in the face, if I say so, for many in the press corps who talked about Labour romping home, or as BBC Scotland said last night, everyone assumes that Labour is going to romp home. They didn't romp home, the SNP ran them very close. Another week in this by-election, and we'd have won it.
Absolutely not me, Gov, on that one, but let's talk to both Raymond Robertson and Jim Wallace on that. I mean, you made a marginal difference in this by-election, and you both, you were up 2%, you were down 2%. You really didn't get a look in on what was actually an SNP Labour fight.
I think by-elections have become that. The electorate identify the two parties that are in contention, and it's difficult for parties which are seen to be in third and fourth place to make any inroads. But nevertheless, we increased our share of the vote. I think it's better than any increase in the share of the vote we managed to get in the Scottish by-election in the last Parliament. That's very satisfactory. We actually concentrated a lot of our effort in the seats which we would hope to make gains in at the next set of council elections. So it was a building block, and I think we had a very good candidate, and people recognised that we'd fought a very good campaign based on applying national issues to the circumstances of Paisley.
But the local issues, Raymond Robertson, were the ones that the Tories said, you know, we can be trusted, and Labour can't be trusted in Paisley. But rather than coming and trusting you, obviously they decided just to stay at home.
Well, Paisley was never going to be fertile ground for us, Kirsty, and frankly we'd be amazed how we'd be discussing the Conservative Party coming first or second in this by-election, let's be honest. But we had probably the best candidate, local florist, a former policewoman, who campaigned hard on the local issues, and Sheila wasn't frightened to take her message to the people of Paisley to say that she was offering Paisley a fresh start across a whole range of local issues. And it was a very strange by-election where we had the party of government frightened to put their candidate on the streets, and that made the whole situation quite unreal in Scottish by-elections.
Well, we'll be hearing from the candidates and we'll be hearing from our political commentators in just a minute. But let's look at Paisley. The town of Paisley lies around 10 miles to the southwest of Glasgow. Tonight's by-election was the latest in a series of political dramas which have enveloped the town. Shelley Joffrey delves into Paisley's recent murky past.
November 1990, Irene Adams and Gordon McMaster jubilant in a double by-election victory. Together they fought off a determined challenge from the Nationalists, and both seemed set for a bright future within the Scottish Labour Party.
All together now, all together now, all together now.
Yet just 7 years on, Gordon McMaster is dead, having committed suicide. Irene Adams has had death threats made against her for her outspoken views on the drug wars in the town. And any mention of Paisley now is usually accompanied by lurid headlines about sleaze, smears and political vendettas. It's only in the last few years, though, that Scotland's largest town has achieved such notoriety. Before then, Paisley folk were fiercely proud of their civic history and always considered themselves a cut above their Glasgow neighbours. It was the textile industry which put Paisley on the map last century. Although it's now much diminished, the ubiquitous Paisley pattern still adorns ties and shawls across the world. Residents of the town are known historically as buddies, but political relations here have been anything but friendly since that famous double by-election victory 7 years ago.
It did all seem quite high after the by-election, but then we came into a period of a lot of violence in the town and problems with drugs, so it was quite hard to represent. On top of that, Gordon became very ill, of course, with ME, which did not help, and I think just all the pressures of representing such a constituency and illness to follow was just too much, clearly.
Whatever actually prompted Gordon McMaster to take his own life, the contents of his suicide note sent shockwaves through the Labour Party. He's said to have accused senior colleagues in his own party of orchestrating a whispering campaign against him. Tommy Graham, MP for the neighbouring constituency of West Renfrewshire, is believed to have been singled out for most criticism. Mr Graham denies the allegations, but he's been suspended by the party pending the outcome of an internal inquiry. However, Irene Adams does not believe Paisley voters will blame the party for the MP's demise.
They speak highly of him in every doorstep, and quite rightly, because he worked terribly, terribly hard. So although there is a bad taste, I don't think people necessarily think that's the fault of the Labour Party. They think that throughout life and in every political party, things will go wrong and there will be people who don't have the party's best interest at heart and are probably on their own side rather than the party's. So I think they are able to separate quite a lot of these things and know that there is very good Labour Party representation in this area, as well as clearly we've had a little local difficulty.
But it's much more than that, say the SNP. To them, it's yet another example of just how fierce Labour infighting can be in these parts.
I think the allegations have damaged Labour, particularly in the long term. Take, for example, the case of Gordon McMaster. If somebody like that, born and brought up in the Labour movement, can be pulled down by people from within its own ranks, people who are supposed to be its political friends and allies, then I do believe that people start to ask exactly what it is that they're voting for. Because the Labour Party is no longer a political organisation on a crusade. It's no longer concerned with things like social justice. It is an organisation designed to keep some people in a job. It's self-serving and it's no longer serving the interests of the wider community.
Strong claims, but hardly surprising given the level of political rivalry between Labour and the Nationalists on Renfrewshire Council. Labour controls the council, but only just, and as the main opposition, the SNP are happy to exploit any internal difficulties Labour may be having. A Nationalist councillor is also implicated in the smear allegations and has been suspended from the SNP. But Labour's dominance in the area, both at a local and parliamentary level, has created fertile ground for one scandal after another.
Where you have a situation where a local party, one local party, is very, very dominant in local government affairs, and that party is the route up the political ladder, the political career structure, then you have open to possibility the abuse of power, because key figures in the local party will effectively be kingmakers, and kingmakers to the route to parliamentary glory.
The king-making began in the early 90s when boundary changes were first mooted for Renfrewshire. A staunchly Labour branch of Tommy Graham's Renfrew West constituency was expected to be absorbed into the neighbouring Paisley North seat. In an unlikely coincidence, membership of that branch more than trebled in 2 months. Mr Graham was accused of attempting to manoeuvre the deselection of Irene Adams to make Paisley North his own by packing the membership with his own supporters. Labour held an inquiry, the Paisley North Party was suspended, but no action was taken against Mr Graham.
The Labour Party is an organisation hanging on by its fingertips in Renfrewshire. It's an organisation where the main priority is to jockey for position and to try and hold on to the trappings of power and the money that brings. And because of that, the Labour Party has stooped to new lows within Renfrewshire to such an extent that it's now a corrupt organisation.
The allegations of political sleaze mounted against the background of a drugs war in the town. Fergusley Park housing estate bore the brunt of this problem. In 1989, a company called FCB Security was set up there. It was a partnership of public and private money designed to revitalise the area. But police were called in to investigate FCB after allegations of drug dealing and money laundering. 2 Labour councillors on the board of FCB have now been suspended by the party pending an investigation. One of the councillors, Harry Reevy, is Tommy Graham's election agent. But the net result of this complicated web of alleged corruption is that yet again it's Paisley's image which suffers.
I think the people who stay in Paisley are now well and truly fed up with all the bad publicity that Paisley's been getting in the national media. Yes, 4 or 5 years ago we had a problem with the drugs in Paisley. No greater or lesser a problem than any other town or city in Britain. Then we had problems of violence, and we had the very tragic and sad untimely death of Gordon McMaster. All this has snowballed, and people outside Paisley must have a terrible image of the town.
The local paper has set itself the difficult task of restoring the town's tarnished image. It recently spelled out in black and white 100 reasons to be proud of Paisley. But after the years of sleaze, can the voters of Paisley be proud of their politicians? Irene Adams believes that far from exposing deep divisions in the ranks, the ongoing inquiries into the allegations will bring the party together.
I don't think there ever were really warring factions. I think there was one small group of people trying to build their own power base. And when other people say to them, no, that's not acceptable, that doesn't make 2 factions. It makes one faction trying to take everything over and the rest of the party saying, no, that is not acceptable to us. So there is great unity within the party. Of course, everybody knows where the faction lay and what they thought should be tackled, and that's why I think there has been so much evidence to the inquiry. I think it will be very, very easy once we've got this cleared up to heal any wounds that are left.
No, I don't think there's any real prospect of a quick healing. I think you will find that the process will be long and protracted, and it will burst out into the open again in the future.
but the voters of Paisley South will be hoping that tonight's result will finally move political relations in the area onto pastures new.
Shelley Joffe. Brian Taylor, first of all, you heard contrasting views there about whether there's going to be any healing process, but let's just go delve back into the campaign. Did sleaze make a marked difference?
It made a difference to the extent that it was, of course, a topic that the opposition parties could attack the governing party upon, but I think they managed to contain it successfully in two ways. One, by a form of control politics, if you like, by simply
not letting anyone speak.
Masterminding the campaign and keeping that under command, but also by perhaps a more straightforward approach, which was the zero tolerance of sleaze that Douglas Alexander spoke about, and the evidence that Labour was at least moving, at least attempting to move on these questions. Only today, for example, Councillor Harry Reevey, suspended from the Labour group, lost his post within the Renfrewshire Council. Action was taken on the day of the by-election itself. I think that evidence that was able to be promulgated by the Labour Party that they were doing something and seemed to be doing something or allegedly doing something was enough to allow them to have something to answer that, both on the doorsteps and on such limited hustings as there were.
But also the SNP didn't go for the jugular, and of course they have their own spats on Renfrewshire Council with Labour.
I think the psychology of Scottish politics has changed somewhat. We heard earlier from Alex Salmond talking about the dual strategy, if you like, of fighting locally but thinking nationally in terms of Scottish parliamentary elections coming up in 18 months' time. I think that very fact has changed the nature of Scottish politics, and that there is a looking forward to that. For the Tory party, it is the potential rescue or the potential nightmare. For the Liberal Democrats, they have to think differently. They can no longer target, they have to spread their vote across Scotland. It has changed the nature of Scottish politics, and that perhaps was reflected in this by-election, although also it could simply have been weariness post-general election, post-referendum.
Well, Robin Oakley, only the second by-election since May. I mean, put it into context of how the last government as well dealt with its first by-election.
Well, indeed. I mean, Donald Dewar is quite fairly making the point that it's nearly 10 years since a government has actually held a seat in a by-election. There will be a certain amount of relief, though, I think, from Labour, who fought a fairly nervous campaign with a not terribly visible candidate here. Clearly they were worried that things like concern over tuition fees, the current government carrying on with Tory spending limits and so on, and not perhaps spending as much as its natural supporters would have hoped on health and education, areas like that. Clearly some nervousness about that. They will contrast the kind of figure we've seen here of a 12% swing with the kind of swings we saw against the Tory government at the start of their last term of office. In Newbury it was, I think, 28%, in Christchurch 35%, much bigger swings. All right, we got a bit further into that parliament before the first by-elections came, but Labour will have been concerned that there could have been the start of genuine swings against the government of the day, because we live in a very volatile age of politics. Swings tend to get more and more extreme at by-elections. So I think they will be fairly content with this particular result.
Brian?
I think that's right. I think the point that Robin mentions there about timing is critical. It was just too early, if you like, for the opposition parties to make that inroad.
Well, we can go straight over and hear from the new MP for Paisley South, who's talking to John Pienaar.
Yes, thank you, Kirsty. Douglas Alexander, congratulations on the result. But what happened to the majority?
Well, this is the third time we've asked electors in Paisley South to go to the polls in 6 months, and I think naturally that was reflected in the turnout. I'm delighted that the percentage of the vote is virtually the same as in the general election, when obviously voters were choosing a government as well as an individual MP. So it's a very strong result for Labour here in Paisley South.
Well, yes, it was an old electoral register, and yes, people were being asked to vote for the third time in 6 months, but it was a very lukewarm response. What effect do you think the campaigning on the subject of sleaze had?
Very little. I think I can say with confidence now that the result reflected what I was picking up on the doorsteps, that it was basic issues like the health service, like jobs, like crime, issues which Labour are dealing with in government that people wanted to talk about on the doorsteps, and I believe voted on the election day today.
Well, some of your own party workers are saying that subject certainly made it harder in many cases to get people enthusiastic about the idea of turning out and voting Labour.
Of course, this was a by-election that took place in tragic and difficult circumstances, and I think perhaps that was reflected in the vote. But nonetheless, the support for the Labour Party remains solid. They gave a clear endorsement to the policies that Tony Blair is pursuing in government, and I'm confident that after an even longer period in office, there'll be an even stronger show of support.
And it was a tremendously low-key, rather defensive campaign, wasn't it? You did rather avoid the sort of day-to-day scrutiny from the media.
Well, I suppose I had the privilege of being the first Labour Party candidate to be defending a seat with a Labour government, probably for a generation. So I think some lessons will probably be learned by all the parties in terms of how to adopt a new approach. But nonetheless, we were very pleased with the response we received because we were determined to take the message directly to the voters.
Didn't it look rather defensive, though, to avoid the daily press conference, something of an institution in political campaigning?
Well, the truth is there were by-elections before the Conservatives even lost in May, where the Labour Party weren't holding daily press conferences. The important point is that as a candidate, you're always available for media scrutiny and to take interviews, and I remained that throughout the entire campaign, but also that you're out there meeting voters. For example, I met the editor of the local newspaper last Sunday. It wasn't a pre-arranged meeting. I met him when I tapped on his door. So I've been out meeting literally thousands of voters day in, day out, and I believe that reflects the strength of support that we got today.
Isn't there something of an obligation on a candidate to face the grilling of the media, almost a democratic obligation of scrutiny?
You don't have to convince me. I've done it on numerous occasions. I've been facing grilling from the media every day. I think perhaps it reflects frustration on the media's part that the public were more interested in the issues that the Labour Party claimed they were interested in, basic issues like jobs, health and education. That was what was coming up in the doorsteps, and I think there was a surprise on the part of the media, shall we say, coming from out with the town to realise that actually voters in Paisley South are very much concerned about the same issues as elsewhere in the country.
Alexander, thank you very much. And now over to Alan Mackay.
Ian Blackford, could you have won? Should you have won?
Well, I think this is a very encouraging result for the SNP. There's been an 11% swing to us today. Our vote has gone up from 24% in the general election here to 33%. Let's not forget, however, that this is 6 months into Labour government. I think this result shows tonight that Labour's honeymoon is coming to an end. What we found in the doorsteps in this constituency, of course, sleaze has been a big issue, but it's also the fact that the people of this constituency are very unhappy on Labour's plans to introduce tuition fees, very unhappy at the cuts in council services that are taking place. I believe that we will build from this result. If there are to be further by-elections in Scotland, perhaps in Govan and West Renfrewshire, then I'm confident that we can win those seats from Labour.
But if that first 6 months has been as bad as you suggest, surely you should have won.
Oh, I think it takes some time for the feel-good factor that may have been there from Labour's election victory on the 1st of May to fade away. It's clearly fading away. The fact is, Labour took 21,000 votes here in the general election. They could only master 10,000 votes today. That shows that the people of Paisley are certainly not willing to place their trust in Labour the way they did in the general election. So Labour's support is already ebbing away. An opinion poll this week in the Herald showed very clearly that in the Scottish Parliament elections, the SNP will do very well. There will be a very considerable shift from Labour to the SNP. So we take courage from this result. The SNP will go in buoyant into the run-up to the Scottish Parliament elections, and we will fight to win in those elections.
Ian Blackford, thank you very much. Now back to you in the studio, Kirsty.
Even more political spin around now, but Alex Salmond, looking at the kind of issues, you're talking about national issues. I mean, what were the national issues that you thought that you could bring to this campaign?
Well, tuition fees is the one we majored in. I think that's something which is causing great concern and is going to damage the Labour Party very considerably if they continue with it. But can I just say, I'm very concerned that this Labour candidate is an advisor to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He actually said his support in percentage terms was the same at the general election. It's actually 11% down. He said the Labour vote was solid. It's less than half of what it was 6 months ago in the general election. Now, I mean, I know candidates have to say things, but this man is an advisor to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I mean, no wonder we've got 5 interest rate rises since the election.
Picking up Don Dewar on the question, I mean, look at all the people at Paisley University. I mean, the tuition fees issue is a very, very big issue in Scotland. The government seems to be at sea about it.
Well, I don't think the government's at sea at all. What we are doing is facing realistically the fact that if we're going to have the kind of expansion in higher education, we've got to be able to fund it. And if you are going to say to me that we can do that without having a loan recovery and a bigger recoupment of cost, then that's unrealistic. I mean, that is fantasy politics, I'm afraid. We've got, in fact, to build a base in which we can build a competitive future with a strong higher education section. We've got 13 universities in Scotland. We're very, very fortunate. It's a tremendous asset to the country, and we want to keep it that way. And
are students funded by England coming to Scottish universities going to have to pay for their 4th year? I mean, that was very much the issue which Paddy Ashdown hit Tony Blair with this week.
The reason why that has become an issue is because we've moved to protect Scottish students. And that is obviously important, and because otherwise comparable degree in Scotland...
So English students are going to get a poorer deal than Scottish students?
Well, English students have always, of course, made sacrifices to come to Scottish universities, and I think you should be very proud. Well, they have. Just wait a minute. They forgo, for example, a year's salary by having a longer course. They have the maintenance
They have better
charges.
education from the fourth year, some would say.
Well, sorry?
Somebody would say by having the fourth year they get an increased education. That would be offset by losing a salary
indeed,
for you.
we obviously contribute in every sense, because we have to bear some of the cost of their education, and we're glad to do it. All I'm saying is that there is a very, very strong case for a Scottish education. And the fact that we've got 5,000 English people graduating every year in Scotland underlines that case.
But let's turn, because tuition fees did come up at the end of the campaign, but other issues in the campaign, Jim Wallace, I mean, local people are concerned about jobs, and they are concerned about cold weather payments and so forth, and they are concerned about what's going to happen under this government, another pledge.
Well, I think that probably their concerns reflects the fact that less than half the people who voted Labour in May turned out to vote Labour today. The fact that they now see, I mean, we highlighted it during the general election, that people now see that Labour actually meant what they said when they said they would adopt the spending patterns, the spending policies of the Conservative government, which means that this year there is no new money for the health service. There was a small amount announced perhaps 2 or 3 weeks ago, but in fact, given the challenges to the health service, it comes too late in this year.
Well, it was the five pledges that were put forward by Tony Blair. It was cutting waiting lists in the health service, but Douglas Alexander's 5 pledges, the pledge in the health service was putting patients first. Well, presumably one would hope that everybody would put patients first.
Well, we would all put patients first, but I mean, Douglas's pledges are probably just as worthwhile as Tony Blair's pledge in April, not to charge tuition fees for university students. He said that in April, and here in October he's putting on tuition fees in a most inequitable and unfair way, and Donald's struggling on this issue just shows how much this government has completely made a mess of this issue.
Well, Donald is struggling on the issue. I mean, you can just imagine what would have happened or what Donald would have said if the SNP had proposed that English students pay more than Scottish students to study at Scottish universities. He'd been jumping up and down, calling the SNP all sorts of nasty names, so little wonder. I mean, it's a position which is totally untenable, and all Donald has to do is persuade his government colleagues to fund the English students at Scottish universities, and why shouldn't they?
Well, we're going to look at more detail at the campaign in a moment, but I just want to ask you, Donald, your point that Robin Oakley was making and Dee Bryan was making before the point. Tony Blair didn't come to constituency. I mean, I know he's a busy man now, he's Prime Minister, but would you not have liked to have seen him come to the first Scottish by-election since the general election?
No, we had a very good turnout of Labour figures in the by-election, a great number. It used to be, of course, as you remember, that Prime Ministers never came to by-elections.
But he went to Uxbridge.
Well, and he'll come to other by-elections, I've no doubt at all. I think what is that...
He was going to go to every by-election, he was breaking the mould. And it's quite noticeable, the first by-election, since Uxbridge, after saying he was going to everyone, he didn't. Why not, Donald?
Well, you may remember that Mrs Thatcher would never go to any, presumably because she was frightened.
This is your Labour
associated with a losing campaign.
To every by-election. Why didn't he come to Paisley?
He went to Uxbridge, which was a marginal seat, and fought very hard for that candidate. He will fight for other candidates when the time comes. What is good about this by-election, from my point of view, is it was fought in difficult circumstances. It's the first time in almost 10 years the government has held a by-election seat. And we have got now in Parliament what I predict will be seen as one of the most able young recruits to Parliament we've had for a very long time. Douglas Alexander is outstanding, and I'm certainly looking forward to having him as a recruit.
Just very, very short. Tony Blair didn't come because you were saying Uxbridge was a marginal. Clearly, Paisley South was not a marginal, but to reassure all the people of Paisley that in fact there was going to be this great new clean broom sweeping through the town, would it not have been a good idea if the Prime Minister had come?
Well, I didn't ask the Prime Minister to come. I don't think that he has to come to every by-election. I think it's refreshing that he's prepared to come out in by-election. I suppose he is, I think, arguably the Prime Minister who has been most in touch with people, who has exposed himself in terms of contact with the electorate directly than any Prime Minister we have seen. And, I mean, frankly, it's rather odd that he's been criticised for coming to some by-elections when there was no criticism in the past for example, Conservative MPs, Prime Ministers, who would never come to a by-election.
Well, let's look in more detail now. Against expectations, this campaign didn't turn out to be a dogfight. In the closing hours, there was a good old-fashioned spat with the other parties piling in against the Nats for their record locally. Well, John Pienaar watched the whole thing.
Tell me, this thing, does it work well?
It's smashing, I think.
Really?
Labour knows all about this kind of campaigning. Friendly faces, a big hitter in town for the cameras, and not much time for embarrassing questions about sleaze or anything else. Douglas Alexander looks and talks like the favoured son of New Labour he is. He sticks to the script. There's never a wrong word or a false step.
Right.
And according to the script, people in Paisley see sleaze as a non-story.
The stories that people are talking about on the doorsteps are the success stories, the fact we've invested new money in the health service, we're investing in education, and we've delivered a Scottish Parliament.
Maybe so, but to the cynics, there's been no campaign to see, no campaign to hear, almost no campaign at all to speak of. Labour's tacticians won't lose too much sleep about being accused of running a lacklustre campaign. Tales of sleaze in Paisley may have left a bad taste in the voters' mouths, but Paisley is deep inside Labour's tribal territory, and Labour's honeymoon with the voters isn't over yet. So a lacklustre campaign looks like a safe strategy. No gaffes, no embarrassing headlines, in fact not many headlines at all. The press promised their readers a battle over sleaze, but Labour campaigned on the party's terms, not the media's. This news conference was a rare event, and the hacks admit they've been beaten.
Very hard to excite anyone about this campaign. It's probably the dullest by-election in Scotland I've covered in the last 20 years. No one seems to be making any ground at all.
From the Labour Party, we've been getting complaints that we've been taking the mickey out of their candidate for not showing his face enough. But I mean, he's been the invisible candidate. It's been a very clever tactic and it's worked.
Jimmy Allison used to be Labour's Scottish organiser. Now he's secretary of the local party, and he told me a low-key campaign was the game plan all along.
Well, that's obviously what the spin doctors have been doing for the party in Paisley South. And they're obviously more than aware of the situation than I may well be. However, one will just have to wait and see. He was a quality candidate. I think he should have been probably given a great deal of opportunity to express his own views during the campaign.
Except, that is, when one journalist tested his local football knowledge.
Do you know the manager of St Mirren? No, he's the manager of St Mirren East. He's Jimmy Bone.
Actually, the manager's called Tony Fitzpatrick, but then being a by-election candidate is a lot less dignified than being a Labour ministerial advisor. Quite a lot less dignified, considering Douglas Alexander was an advisor to the Chancellor. His rival for Labour's nomination was actually an advisor to Tony Blair. Labour wanted a candidate untainted and approved by the leadership. In that respect, a lot like his SNP rival Ian Blackford.
Certainly Labour can't answer questions at the moment. They're afraid to face you.
But the crowds weren't exactly flocking to hear the SNP either. With a little help from veterans like Winnie Ewing, the SNP's tried to land a blow on Labour. Somehow the response hasn't exactly been electrifying.
You get sleaze everywhere. It's not the same way you go. You really get sleaze.
I would vote SNP. Well, this is a Labour place, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are dying to vote Labour and that's it. I mean, if they put a teddy bear up with Labour Rosette and vote Labour, you know.
Alex Salmond is believed to be disappointed with the impact of the SNP campaign. The attacks on sleaze somehow never hit home. But he's also looking beyond this by-election to the Scottish Parliament.
This is not just an election about the way the Labour Party has been running things locally. It's also an election about how the Labour Party are sticking to Tory policies and not changing things for the better nationally in Scotland.
On a derelict mill site, the Liberal Democrats' campaign was approaching as much of a climax as it could manage.
Hold it out to the side.
Now, be honest, Jim, don't you feel a little bit silly? Come on.
I've done worse.
Eileen McCartan fought gamely but hopelessly on her record as a local councillor against the outsiders from Labour and the SNP. She was quite rude about the Labour candidate. Was it really on for Eileen to call him Gordon's boy and a party lackey?
Well, we all know he's Gordon's boy. Nothing wrong necessarily with being Gordon's boy. Being a speech maker to the Chancellor of the Exchequer is not an unworthy thing to do. And if he's a man that does Gordon's bidding and the leadership bidding, well, probably that makes him no different from anyone else in the Labour Party.
As for the Conservatives, William Hague turned up to help. But Sheila Laidlaw, who's a former police officer with her own business, needed a lot more help than that to overcome local scepticism about the Tories.
S-C-O-L-A-N-D, Scotland!
The spelling wasn't perfect, but the message was clear. You're a long way from home. The Tory recovery hasn't really started, north or south of the border, and it certainly won't start here. Labour's confident of seeing off the challenge from the SNP, but no one's expecting a big turnout. Apathy and the problem of persuading people to turn out for the third time in 6 months could mean a lot of people simply stay at home. Labour's majority is about to be pared down, but the SNP will be as surprised as anyone if they achieve much more than that tonight.
John Pienaar. Donald Dewar, lacklustre campaign, low-key, you didn't have the kind of riveting early morning press conferences that you normally have. Should you bring them back with a vengeance? So the Journalists have got something to talk about, and we can hear more of what your candidates have to say.
It was a slight touch of irony, as you referred to those riveting early morning press conferences. Well, funny enough, it may have been a mistake not to run them every day. We ran them sometimes in the afternoon, we ran them at lunchtime. We had probably as many press conferences, but we varied the diet, and we were heavily criticised for doing so. But that's not important in itself. I mean, it was a low-key by-election in difficult circumstances for us, there's no doubt about that. As I say, and I don't want to go over the old ground, if you look back to the 1990 by-election, our share of the poll was within 2%. The swing against the SNP was exactly the same. And of course, we built from that to what happened in 1997. But
given if you look at the Gallup poll in tomorrow's Daily Telegraph, that says, you know, that the Blair honeymoon goes on, and indeed all the figures, indeed all voters supporting, for example, a single currency. 58% of all voters support Gordon Brown as a single currency. Economic competence up yet again. Every figure up for Labour in this poll. You would think perhaps you wouldn't have taken quite such a hit locally.
Well, let me just say to you that I think that in a by-election you get very different phenomena and very different dynamics. And if you look at safe Labour seats in by-elections recently, which were thought to be formalities, Hemsworth, Barnsley, 35% poll, Dudley, I can't remember, it was I think 41 or something of that order. People stay at home because they don't think it's going to decide something in terms of national politics, and they think they know what the result is going to be, and they were right, they did know what the result was going to be. Now, I would have liked a higher poll. All of us should have liked a higher poll. If we're talking about lacklustre campaigns, it was very difficult in the circumstances to get momentum, and that's true of all the parties. I mean, it's all Labour's lacklustre campaign. I have to say, and this is my way of inverted tribute to Alec Salmond, in the past in by-elections, the SNP activists have managed to create an enormous noise and momentum, even if it wasn't reflected in votes. But that didn't happen either.
Well, I want to put that to Alex Salmond. I want to put Brian Taylor's point to you, that it's kind of post-referendum trauma syndrome, where, you know, politicians don't quite know how to play it anymore, especially with the electorate who seem to have quite liked the consensual politics that certainly existed up to the night of the referendum. And in fact, you don't know now whether to go to the jugular or not.
Kirsty, there's some truth in that, and I'm going to come to that in a second. But can I just make the point very clearly? I mean, John's an experienced reporter. We've just seen his report. He talked about the Labour majority being pared down. The Labour majority was less than a quarter of what it was 6 months ago in the general election. This is not the result that the journalists watching this campaign expected. They all expected the Labour majority to be reduced, but nothing like reduced to 2,700. Donald said the same swing as the 1990... Well, coming to that, Donald, there's a 12% swing against you. It's not just a question of turnout, it's a question of the fact that your vote is down over 10% since the general election, and the SNP vote...
It's a bigger swing than other safe Labour seats.
If you look at the 1990 by-election, it was almost exactly the same swing in the seat.
Right, let me come to that point, Donald. The 1990 by-election is from the SNP coming from 14% in the 1987 general election. This is from the SNP coming from 23%.
Right. Let's bring Robin Oakley in.
Can I make a point? One point I want to make to you. This is a dramatic slashing of the Labour majority. It's a much better result for the Scottish National Party than any journalist reporting this campaign, and I've got all the quotes and all the quotes from the last few days. I think I'm entitled to say that you shouldn't stick to the pre-election night script trying to explain an SNP failure to break through when we've had a dramatic 12% swing and a Labour majority which has been reduced to 2,700.
19% swing in Monkton's. Yep, we'd like to bring you in, Robin Oakley.
Well, I think I agree with Brian that we surely have seen here a sort of an effect of the devolution referendum campaign. That there's an inhibiting factor here because we have seen the Scottish National Party get much more momentum going in these kind of by-elections in the past. When I was there on Monday, the SNP people were all telling me they'd outposted and out-campaigned the Labour Party over the weekend. Certainly you could see plenty of SNP stickers and so on around, but there was no sense of razzmatazz about it. There was, and if the SNP had got that effort going, they got it going too late in this campaign, and I think that was a hangover from the
I was going to say, do you wonder what impact might have been made if they had actually channeled much more energy in right across the board? I mean, Alex Salmond said, you know, that by the last Saturday there was a huge amount of people there, but do you think if they'd actually gone for it, there might have actually been a bigger impact?
I think they might have made a bigger impact, and I think they could have probably gone harder on Sleaze than they chose to do. But I think Labour's tactics certainly worked on Sleaze. When you look back to the Monklands by-election in '94, where Labour tackled the issue of Sleaze head-on, rather than just keeping the whole thing low-key and quiet, They got a 19% swing against them that time, so Labour's tactics of playing it low-key didn't seem to work.
That is important, and Kirsty herself mentioned Monklands. I mean, in these by-elections, and particularly difficult by-elections, Monklands and Paisley, I mean, you get these very, very big swings. 19% in Monklands. Helen Liddell's majority at the general election was what? I can't remember, 16,000 or something of that order. So, I mean, Alec is entitled to paddle his canoe. But I think really when we see this in perspective, well, let's
put another. Let's just very briefly. Wait a minute, just wait a minute, Alec. I'd like to put another perspective on it. Another perspective on it for a moment.
Yeah.
That Monklands, Paisley, Glasgow. What we're seeing now is a kind of different kind of politics emerging for the after the referendum, and indeed, funnily enough, I mean, the situation in Glasgow could be said to have actually done you some good, because you were able to come out and say that in a new Scottish Parliament, everything would be above board, there'd be none of the shenanigans. But this by-election was taking place against a broader backdrop of worries about local Labour politics.
Well, we said from the very beginning it was a difficult by-election for us. We're moving. I mean, one of the things that has happened, of course, is where there has been impropriety, we've asked the police to investigate. And we've done that in a number of instances where we thought it was necessary, and we've done it unhesitatingly and immediately, and we'll continue to do so. But can I say to you that these by-election swings, I repeat the point, I mean, Alex says 12% dramatic. The last time we had a by-election in this seat, the swing to SNP was 11%.
Well, let's break off.
Donald won a by-election when Labour were in government in 1977, and the swing from Labour to SNP was 4%. So I think 12% is rather a large swing.
Well, let's bring in another guest tonight, and that is Professor Alan Alexander, who's a local government expert, indeed particularly expert on local government and Labour shenanigans. Now, Alan Alexander, what do you make of tonight's result?
I think the overwhelming impression I have out here, Kirsty, is relief among the Labour people that they did as well as they did this evening. I think they've been very lucky that the sleaze issue just stubbornly failed to take off in the by-election. Always difficult, I think, to extrapolate from a by-election to any national election. Certainly, if you could, a 32.5% showing by the SNP would give them a very, very good representation under whatever electoral system in the Scottish Parliament. But that's a long way off. I think that there's a lot of voter fatigue, because the voters seem to edit sleaze out of the referendum. They seem to me to have edited out of this by-election as well.
What, you say you can't extrapolate obviously to a general election or any future elections, but you talked about voter fatigue. Do you think there is a fatigue even about the kind of broader issues, the national issues which we were talking there about, tuition fees, and indeed we haven't been talking about this, but the whole ruling out of using any chill factor and cold weather payments, issues that are really upsetting people just now?
I think it's very difficult to persuade people to be enthusiastic about elections 3 times in 6 months. That's the point I want to make. There were big issues around, but none of them seem to catch the imagination of the electorate. You need to look at the turnout. The turnout is really very low. It's as low as you usually get in by-elections. And that seems to me to suggest that people were very, very difficult to galvanise whatever the issues were.
Alan Alexander, thank you very much indeed. Indeed, the Prime Minister has spoken about tonight's result. Tony Blair was quick to hail Labour's win. He said, "This is a good result for Labour after all the predictions of defeat made before the by-election was called," he said. "It's the first by-election hold for the party of government since 1989. Douglas Alexander was a splendid candidate and we fought a good campaign. The voters of Paisley South have shown their support for the new government and backed our action to put young people back to work, improve education and cut crime." Jim Wallace.
Voters of Paisley South have elected a Labour MP. We can't actually say that they've supported the government. I mean, on a very low turnout, the Labour Party couldn't even get more than 50% of the vote. And I think we all should, we all can't take any satisfaction from a low turnout. That's not good for democracy, and that may actually reflect...
Do you agree with Alan Alexander about voter fatigue 3 times in a year is too much?
I think that must be a factor, but I think where the Labour Party perhaps cannot really rest on their laurels is that whilst we all, 4 of us here, poll fewer votes tonight than we did on May the 1st, I mean, the Labour Party's vote is down by more than a half. The rest of us, the drop-off in our vote is nothing like that. People were not turning out, but far more Labour people were refusing to turn out than proportionately with respect to the other 3 parties. And I think that may well be a reflection on the circumstances in Paisley, voter fatigue part of it, but also general dissatisfaction with some of the government's policy.
We can move and look outside Paisley Town Hall, because whatever happens in a by-election, it seems the SNP wants to have a party. And so there they are outside, clapping furiously. Presumably their candidate is somewhere in the vicinity. I can't quite see him just now. But yes, there is the SNP candidate there. And Mike Russell, the chief executive of the party behind him, going out to greet some of his supporters, many of whom have been tramping the streets, particularly in the last week. Alec?
Yes, well, I mean, I think the scenes tell it all. That's an excellent result, and that's the way it's being received by the party. Now, I did say earlier on that I would address this point about numbers. There is actually a very practical point when you have 3 elections in 6 months, and that is that political activists use up their holidays. And we had a problem early in this campaign that the normal activists we can marshal in the by-election from around Scotland didn't use holidays. But in the last week of the campaign, we had huge numbers out, which is why the momentum was very strongly towards us. And I've got absolutely no doubt that a few more days would have seen us overhaul the Labour Party, and instead of them hanging on by 2,700, they would have lost this by-election. So that's why I think it's very good news indeed for the SNP.
Fine.
I think that the Scottish politics finds itself almost in a position of stasis. It's waiting for the change that devolution will bring, and I think we see a factor here we saw in the general election, and we above all saw it in the referendum. The people had quietly and determinedly made up their mind, and they registered that vote when they came out. And they weren't necessarily swayed by any of the activities that were taking place from the political parties. I think that there was a poll earlier this week in the Herald that indicated that there might be some sort of differential in the voting pattern were that Scottish Parliament to come about. It was indicating that perhaps the SNP might do a little better, might do proportionately better than they would do in general election circumstances. And that's, you know, while not commenting precisely on that, that's the sort of factor to be borne in mind in the calculations that are coming up in Scottish politics. Will people vote in a different way in Scottish parliamentary elections? Will they return to the Conservatives? Can a party of the centre right do well? Will the Liberal Democrats manage to garner votes across Scotland when they have to give up the targeting practice? That, I think, is the sort of stuff that's coming, not frankly, the Paisley by-election.
But if you look at the by-election as far as the Conservatives are concerned, it's one of the lowest ever Conservative votes in a by-election, 7%. Now, you might have thought that you'd have reaped the benefit of your new cohesive policy on a Scottish Parliament, that you were going to go for it wholeheartedly. But it doesn't seem to have paid off.
Well, we're talking about the Monkless by-election. It's about more than double what we got at the Monkless by-election.
Is that a great triumph? Is that a great triumph?
Well, given that the gubbing we got in May and defeat again on September 11th, it was difficult to motivate our people. But we said from the very beginning we were going to use this by-election as the start of our process of trying to reconnect with the people of Scotland, to try and rebuild the trust which we accept broke down badly on the 1st of May. We couldn't have asked for a better candidate to do that than Sheila Laidlaw, who lives in the constituency, who's campaigned hard on a series of local issues all her life for the people of Paisley. Please let me finish. And we started the process of rebuilding, and given what's happened in previous by-elections, our percentage vote, round about the same as it was the 1st of May, is not a bad result.
2% down, so your process of rebuilding is actually going backwards at the moment.
As I said, it was never going to be an easy by-election for us, but we can be well pleased. We've started the process, as I say, of talking to people again about the issues that they're talking about and the language that they're talking about. It's going to be a long road back for us, we know that, but we started well with Sheila.
Robin Oakley, you want to come in?
Well, we've been talking here about the non-appearance of Tony Blair in this by-election. I'll make one firm prediction, and that is that we won't see him at all in the next by-election at Winchester, because, if this has been a low-visibility Labour campaign, I'll happily take a bet on this, and if this has been a low-visibility Labour campaign in Paisley, it's going to be even more low-visibility in Winchester, because Labour's campaign will be a token campaign, leaving it to the Liberal Democrats to...
I think you ought to explain to these people, probably everyone who watches this hour of night knows about Winchester. It's a quite extraordinary situation. It's a rerun of the general election
But Tony Blair won't be coming to support the Liberal Democrat candidate, then?
Well, I can confirm that Tony Blair will not be supporting the Liberal Democrat candidate.
It's so extraordinary.
Paddy Ashard will be in Winchester. He has been in Winchester.
Can we look ahead? I mean, Brian raised the point about differential voting for the Scottish Parliament elections. The Herald poll showed the SNP in 29% when people asked about how they would vote in a Scottish Parliament. We've had our best ever result in Paisley South tonight. If we look ahead, then the circumstances in Scottish politics look very good indeed for the Scottish National Party.
And a big maiden speech from Douglas Alexander?
Douglas will be a very, very able MP.
No, I'm afraid I would say that's all from this by-election special on the night Douglas Alexander became Tony Blair's latest lieutenant. The next electoral test, as we said, comes in a fortnight's time in both Winchester and Beckenham. But from now, here in Glasgow, from all of us, good night.
photography.